Mesdames et messieurs, bonjour. Bienvenue dans cette séance matinale consacrée à la paix dans un monde polarisé. Mon nom est Julien Toureille, je serai le modérateur de cette session. Dans un monde de plus en plus fragmenté, polarisé et traversé des tensions multiples, la question de la paix apparaît des plus cruciales. Comment relever les défis pour bâtir un monde pacifié ? Le multilatéralisme peut-il être réinventé pour atteindre cet objectif? Ce sont là des questions fondamentales que nous vous proposons d'explorer dans le cadre de cette session. Dans cette perspective, j'inviterai nos panélistes, que je vais vous présenter dans un instant, à nous faire réfléchir et à réfléchir eux-mêmes à des pistes de politique, à des initiatives et à des actions concrètes qui pourraient contribuer à renforcer la paix, tant au niveau régional que global. Nos panélistes sont, et je vous les présente donc tout de suite, Son Excellence Mamadou Tangara, ministre des Affaires étrangères, de la coopération internationale et des Gambiens de l'étranger de la République de Gambie. Son Excellence Miroslav Cerar, ancien Premier ministre de Slovénie. Son Excellence Miroslav Lajčák, ancien président de l'Assemblée générale de l'ONU et représentant spécial de l'Union européenne dans le cadre du dialogue Belgrade-Pristina. Jeppe Kofod, ancien ministre des Affaires étrangères du Danemark. Madame l'ambassadrice Fu Ying, ancienne ambassadrice de Chine au Royaume-Uni. Vytautas Pinkus, ambassadeur, directeur du département des affaires globales au ministère lituanien des Affaires étrangères. Et Mark Ellenbogen, expert conseiller en politique étrangère, nous provenant des États-Unis. Je vais lancer notre discussion avec deux questions de base au cœur de cette session et de son intitulé. Ma première question, Monsieur Tangara, s'adresse à vous. Quelles sont selon vous les principales lignes de fracture qui contribuent à la polarisation du monde que nous connaissons actuellement? Et quels sont selon vous, si vous êtes d'accord avec cette description, les principaux facteurs qui contribuent à cette polarisation du monde?
Merci beaucoup, monsieur le modérateur. Je suis d'abord heureux d'être ici de nouveau pour participer à ces MEDays. Et pour moi, je considère que c'est même un devoir de venir, parce que quand j'ai commencé ma carrière en tant que ministre, à l'époque, l'organisateur de ce forum, son père était ministre des Affaires étrangères et m'a pris sous ses ailes. Donc, pour moi, c'est toujours un devoir de venir de participer aux MEDays. Par rapport à votre question, je pense que je vais être un peu cynique. Je pense que si on n'a rien appris avec la pandémie du coronavirus, on n'aura rien appris. Parce que ce virus, je le dis souvent sans cynisme, que c'est le virus le plus démocratique qui nous a montré que nous vivons dans un monde global. Ce qui affecte indirectement nous affecte tous. Donc on est tenu, comme nous préconisent les SDGs, to work together and leaving no one behind. Mais aujourd'hui, cette fracture au niveau des idéologies et des positionnements a fait que le monde est polarisé, cela se voit à tous les niveaux. Et par rapport au conflit aussi, on voit le double standard, the double standard of some powers. When il y a un poids, deux mesures. Ce qu'on ne met pas en avant, c'est l'intérêt général et de savoir que nous avons un destin, notre destin est inextricablement lié. Et donc, par rapport aux grands défis, il est important qu'on puisse mettre de côté les questions idéologiques et s'entendre autour de l'essentiel. Et aujourd'hui, on a vu que les Nations Unies a énormément de problèmes pour faire prévaloir le droit, faire prévaloir ses idéaux, mais ça reste quand même un outil indispensable pour préserver un monde de paix. Et comme le disait l'un des secrétaires généraux des Nations Unies, Dag Hammarskjöld, les Nations Unies ont été créées non pas pour nous amener vers le paradis, mais pour éviter l'enfer. Et nous voyons aujourd'hui ce qui se passe dans le monde. Je pense que c'est matière à réflexion. peut-être que je vais faire une digression en voyant les images de Gaza, je pense que ça fend le cœur à tout le monde. Donc il est important que la communauté essaye de se mobiliser derrière l'essentiel et de dire, d'avoir le courage de dire aussi la vérité. Je pense que ça, c'est très important parce que la vérité, elle est quand même universelle. Et ce qui n'est pas normal, on ne peut pas le transformer. On ne peut pas ériger le mal en bien. C'est évident, ça saute aux yeux. Donc il est important qu'on puisse travailler ensemble autour de l'essentiel pour préserver la paix dans le monde.
Merci, Monsieur Tanger. Je m'adresserai à Monsieur Serrar. Justement, la question de la vérité. Est-ce que dire la vérité peut être une façon de surmonter les clivages, les fractures de ce monde polarisé?
First, let me express my gratefulness to the organizers for the invitation to this forum, for this conference, and for their great hospitality. Then, of course, if I try to add to what has just been said, let me start by saying that we must accept the fact that our civilization, human civilization, although it has made great technological achievements in last centuries, especially in last decades, it is still at a very low level from the point of view of morality, ethics, as well as politics. Sorry?
The mic, please.
It's okay, just closer to the mic.
Okay, just closer to the mic. Okay. And for this reason, there is no universal truth for the people, of course, because we are not able to comprehend it, even if there was some such truth. So the reasons for divide, for this fragmentation of the world are several, are various. For example, nationalisms, isolationisms, religious fanaticisms. And of course, this all stems from the people who are, and we are, of course, too egoistic, too unable to be more solidary, to be more empathetic, and so on. But there are also other factors which are more objective, like climate change, like scarcity of resources, which bring us into conflicts of different kinds. So I believe that we have done a very good thing in 2017 when we globally agreed to sign, to join the Agenda 2030, because we defined our sustainable goals for the humanity, for the future. And I think that those goals actually comprise all we need to know, all we need to do in the future to make the world less fragmented, less conflictual, etc. Of course, there are many ideals there which cannot be reached so quickly, but this is the direction we all have to take, all have to follow, and I believe that we owe this to the future generation. This is our most important ethical duty, to somehow fulfill as much as we can these sustainable goals for the humanity as such, and for our children, of course. And for this reason, I believe that, or let me also mention, we are supposed to talk about peace, about security, and of course, human rights, democracy, and such values, which are part of this sustainable development. So we must understand that the peace, for example, is not just the goal which we need to reach, but it is also a precondition for any kind of sustainable development, as well as security, as well as human rights, and probably also democratic values. So for this reason, we need a very, let's say, strong leadership in the world. We need leaders who lead by example, who are personally committed to these goals. We need more multilateralism, which will probably be the topic at the later stage of our conversation. And of course, we must define the root causes. This is very important. We must always start to neutralize the root causes and not just the symptoms of the issues of the problems. So this would be my, let's say, introduction to the discussion, and I will add something later on. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Serrard. Je me tourne vers Monsieur Lajak tout de suite. Monsieur Serrard évoquait par exemple que la mobilisation pour l'atteinte des objectifs de développement durable pouvait être une façon de surmonter les divisions du monde fragmenté. Pensez-vous que ce soit suffisant ou sommes-nous confrontés à des facteurs beaucoup plus forts que la mobilisation pour ces objectifs du développement durable qui nous maintiennent, donc ces facteurs qui nous maintiennent dans un monde polarisé et divisé?
Good morning, everyone, and like previous speakers, I want to express my gratitude for being invited to this great forum, in the first place, and second, thank you for choosing this very urgent and topical subject for our opening discussion. And you know, it is an irony that the challenges we are facing are more and more global. Issues that climate change, global warming, or hunger, migration, terrorism, challenges coming with artificial intelligence, and you can go on and on and on, are the challenges which do not respect national borders. That means we are facing them all together, and yet, instead of being more united, we are more fragmented. And that's why our response to these challenges is not adequate. The biggest problem, as I see it, is that the multilateral system, which was created after the World War II, no longer represents the realities of today's world. And there is a bigger and bigger portion of the population of this planet which does not feel properly represented by the system as it was set up after the World War II. And therefore they demand a new agreement and a new, more just system, and the Security Council of the United Nations, and particularly the right of veto, is the case in study, of course, for this. But as long as those who are benefiting from the current system are resisting this call, we continue falling more and more apart, and our multilateral system is not delivering as expected. So we have more multipolar system, but less multilateral system. It sounds like the same words, but it's very different, because multilateralism means the world which is based on rules, and rules apply to everyone, big or small. While multipolar is that whoever feels that can play a role, have their say, or do what they consider important for them, they just do. And we don't see to have a global authority that can stop these activities which are dangerous. The authorities that we have created, such as, again, Security Council of the United Nations, but also other international organizations, are less respected. And it's very, very clear that we need to face the reality, because if you want to find a solution to a problem, you need to define what the problem is. And you also have to see yourself potentially being part of the problem, because if you only want to see the problem with the others, then this is probably not a good diagnosis to start with. So therefore, we need the multilateral system as we know it, as I said, is not delivering, and there is no going back to it. It needs to be updated so that it's more representative. Otherwise we are running the risk that we will have no rules, and then it will be global anarchy, and I don't want to think about it, because that means that we will live in the system which is power-based and not rules-based. And that means the vast majority of the countries which are middle-sized or small will be on the losing end of such a system. Or there is another risk of creating separate systems, which will be like bubbles, which will not communicate to each other, but will be locked into each other, with separate financial system, separate communication system, separate system of values, and instead of talking to each other, we will be talking about each other. I don't think this will help us to solve the global challenges we are all facing. So therefore, discussions like this are very important so that we try to identify what are the problems, what are the challenges, and what could be the way to solve them.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Lajek. Je me tourne vers Monsieur Kofod. Monsieur Lajek évoquait à l'instant les tensions ou la contradiction entre des enjeux globaux qui dépassent les frontières et la tendance au repli sur soi dans bien des cas et dans bien des pays qui entretiennent donc cette fragmentation, cette incapacité d'une approche multilatérale pour régler les problèmes. Quel serait votre sentiment par rapport à ça ?
Well, first of all, thank you so much also for inviting me to this very important forum, and thanks to the organizers. I'm happy to be back in Morocco after I was here 2 years ago visiting Foreign Minister, His Excellency Nasser Bourita, when I was still in office as Foreign Minister of Denmark. Listen, I think this question we're discussing is very, very fundamental to peace in the world of today, and you ask a very important question. We have to identify, as Lajek also said, we have to identify what is the drivers of these polarization in our global society. And there are many. And I think we could mention them, but I think the most important, what is the answer to that? What do we do as a global community? I will get back to that. I think we'll get other rounds, but I think one of the main things is, for me, globally, is to reform the UN. Including the UN Security Council. This is, to me, more urgent than ever. We have talked about it for decades, but now it's the time. If we want a truly inclusive, representative, legitimate, effective multilateral system, what we don't have today. I was, in March of last year, I went to the UN just after the Russian aggression against Ukraine, and I had a meeting with Guterres, and I asked him, what role do UN play in the crisis between Russia, the aggression, and Ukraine? None. They were playing no role, and the UN system was captured by disinformation, by inability to act. So I think it's obvious we need to do something to restore multilateralism in an effective manner. I think one of the reasons that are driving us apart is a new nationalism. It's also cultural divides. It's fueled by social media. One of the initiatives I took as foreign minister was what I call Tech for Democracy, where I wanted to get governments, tech companies, civil society together to deal with how do we preserve dignity, a decent way of talking about global issues. Because if not, we will have a situation where these technologies will be in the hand of the ones who want to drive us apart. And we've seen it so many places in the Western world and other places around the world. So we need to deal with that. But then, also coming from Denmark, I want to say that I'm very concerned about the kind of rising inequality that we have seen globally, and also the lack of ordinary people's representation in society. You see it in my country, in Denmark. You saw it in the US. There are people who felt that globalization didn't give them the opportunity that they were looking for, that their job was lost. And if we cannot restore a more inclusive economy, I think we will not be able to peacefully work together in the future. So that is some of the features. I do think that we have an opportunity because when we recognize the problems, we are also able to solve them. Of course, it will require a mountain of political will and leadership. And that question, where does that come from, is a question I think we should look at too, because we in Europe, frankly speaking, I don't see a united Europe around this, solving these issues. Globally, I see geopolitics is driving us apart, US-China rivalry, of course, Russia's now aggression. The fall of kind of also authoritarian thinking is on the rise and the fall of democratic thinking is also another very concerning part of what we are looking into. So we need to find leadership. And I would be happy to talk about that later, but really reform the UN, reform the multilateral system in a radical way to save, I think, a more inclusive world is what we need right now.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Kofod. Je me tourne vers vous, ambassadrice Fuying, et je rebondis sur ce que Monsieur Kofod vient de dire concernant notamment la nécessité de réformer l'institution multilatérale par excellence qui est l'Organisation des Nations Unies. Dans votre perspective, quel rôle pourraient jouer les membres permanents du Conseil de sécurité, les fameux P5, dans la réforme de ces institutions multilatérales? Peuvent-ils jouer un rôle? Veulent-ils jouer un rôle qui permettrait de surmonter les fractures du monde actuel?
Thank you very much. First of all, I'd like to also say appreciation and thanks to Mr. Fassi Fili for organizing this great conference, and I'm very honored to be invited to attend. I tend to agree with almost all that is said by the previous speakers. I seldom find so much agreement in a panel like this on such an important issue. Indeed, the question facing us is that there is a tendency of multipolarization of the world. At the same time, we are seeing the weakening of multilateral institutions and the global consensus on multilateralism. The reason, there are many reasons, I agree with the previous comments. I want to focus on one aspect. Is after the end of the Cold War, one of the most important changes in the world is, I think, one of the most successful changes in the world is economic globalization, which has brought really a period of golden growth in the world. Global economy increased by 3 times. Many countries, including China, were able to gain fast growth. But one byproduct or one important product of economic globalization is the dilution of power, of international power. There is more power centers in the world. According to the World Bank statistics, US GDP now is 25% of the world, and China is about 18%. But neither US nor China can dominate the world affairs now. It is clear that multipolarization is rising in the world. But does it mean good prospect for the world? History book shows that mankind does not have a history of peacefully managing, governing multipolar situation. In the past, there were mostly, multipolar period is mostly dominated by conflicts, even wars. So how do we avoid the conflicting or fragmentation of a multipolar period? As the previous speakers said, that we need effective multilateral governance. But now the multilateral institutions, even ideas, the spirits, the principles are all confronted with challenges. I'll list a few. First, the most important challenge is the risk of power rivalry. The US, which is the superpower of the world, has launched this strategic competition with China. From the Chinese angle, we think the objective, I talk with American friends many times, what is the purpose? What's the end game? What are we competing for? The Chinese side feels that the purpose is to stop China from taking the power, global power from the US, overtake US as a leader of the world. China does not have that objective, but it's not important. US is afraid of China taking over, so it is using every means, trade war, science war, or even human rights, all became a tool for bashing China, for rivaling with China. So China feels that we are at the receiving end of this bashing. We should stand firm and fight back. This phenomenon does exert pressure on the world, on the global governance, on the multilateral collective cooperation of the world. Take a pandemic, for example. There's no effective organization of a collective effort against the pandemic. Protectionism, countries' selfish interests prevailed during that period of time. I remember, was it then the US government president, I don't want to name his name, he even threatened that US should withdraw from WHO. And it was mentioned just now that UN is incapable on important issues, even at this moment, important issues of war or peace, and energy shortage, food shortage. Second challenge for multilateralism is the unprecedented challenges like climate change, like AI, technological advance. Third challenge is, I shouldn't repeat too much, that is the insufficient representation by global South in the multilateral institutions. So how do we reform the multilateral institutions? How do we perfect it? How do we avoid fragmentation or disorder at a time when the unilateral structure is weakening and the multilateral tendency is rising? It's a big question. From the part of China, we propose for multilateralism. The Chinese president proposed for the community of shared future for mankind. And 3 days ago, there was a meeting between Chinese president and US president in San Francisco, which is sending out positive signals. And the two sides agreed on a list of things, including working together, being responsible for dealing with the global affairs, especially they promised to work together to bring the COP28 to success. So I think there's good news, there's bad news, but I think we should if we work together, if China, US can work together, if the world can work together, we should be able to find a solution. Maybe we'll talk more later on.
Merci beaucoup, ambassadrice Fu Ying. Monsieur Pincus, je me tourne vers vous. L'ambassadrice évoquait il y a un instant les difficultés dans un monde multipolaire d'établir un cadre multilatéral. Quelle est votre perspective là-dessus? Pensez-vous que le cadre multilatéral peut être réformé pour s'adapter aux défis et aux risques de ce monde multipolaire?
Good morning, and first of all, I would like to join other speakers by expressing my appreciation for inviting me to be in this audience, in this forum. I am coming from a very tiny country in the very north of Europe, and being a small country, we are really very keen and sincere supporter of the world order based on rule of law. Yes, we do see that we are struggling right now to continue that way, and in that particular situation, what was mentioned by Mr. Lajčák, really small countries struggling most of all. We want also to be heard, to present our positions, and it's quite obvious that usually we count mainly on those regional like-minded organizations which used to be based on consensus and dialogue. And generally speaking, in the international fora, that would be the best way to continue. It's not the case. We see different interests, and we see the situation when instead of willingness to compromise, different actors presenting their own interests. The way to go ahead and also to find out the new system of multilateralism is, of course, dialogue. And what is the base for that dialogue probably what Mr. Minister said, the truth is universal. But somehow we see that we listen to that truth a bit different way and present it a little bit different way. So first solution would be really to not only to propose our arguments, but also to listen to the arguments of other side. The problem is that solution or discussion could be continued only when those demands are seen legitimate by other players. We have very simple example like, well, Russia's behavior, recent behavior against Ukraine, then when, well, the rest of the world could not see it as a legitimate. Then it's a question really how to go ahead to find a solution for that. Probably again, it's the one way is kind of a wide cooperation of different actors in the world. And here it's really an issue of leadership, which was mentioned a few times. Probably it's that what we needed, what we earlier and what we needed right now, the leadership in the world.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Pincus. Monsieur Ellenbogen, pour finir ce premier tour de table, si je puis dire, une question relativement simple. Dans la lignée de ce que disait il y a quelques instants l'ambassadrice Fuying, pensez-vous que la rivalité entre grandes puissances soit un obstacle à l'émergence d'un nouveau multilatéralisme, ou pensez-vous que les deux principales puissances rivales peuvent coopérer pour aider à la mise en œuvre d'un nouveau cadre multilatéral?
Well, I'm on the next panel too, and I will answer that question then. Meanwhile, I will give up my time so we can hear more questions from the young people. And I'd ask you to add my time to that. Thank you.
Donc je vous encourage à participer aussi au panel suivant pour avoir la réponse à ma question de M. Ellenbogen, ou reposer la question tout à l'heure en espérant avoir la réponse, mais merci. Donc j'engage tout de suite le deuxième tour de discussion, peut-être en mettant l'accent sur des aspects un petit peu plus concrets. Vous avez, pour la plupart d'entre vous, évoqué un phénomène assez intéressant qui expliquerait les tensions et les fractures dans le monde actuel, qui est le rôle des nouvelles technologies, que ce soit les réseaux sociaux ou les risques liés à l'intelligence artificielle. Ces acteurs, ces technologies sont dans les mains d'entreprises privées et souvent ne mettent pas ces entreprises privées de l'avant la vérité, mais peut-être plus le profit. Et je me tourne vers vous, Monsieur Tanger, pour commencer. Comment les États peuvent-ils contribuer ou chercher à encadrer ces acteurs privés pour en faire des acteurs au service de la paix et pas simplement des acteurs qui accroissent les divisions dans le monde?
Bon, malheureusement, les réseaux sociaux ne sont que le reflet de ce que nous sommes, parce que c'est des outils qui sont entre les hommes et qui aujourd'hui mettent sur la place publique ce que nous pensons tout bas, malheureusement. Et il est très difficile de le contrôler au nom de la liberté d'expression, qui malheureusement, certains profitent de cette liberté d'expression pour propager des idées de haine, de chauvinisme qui ne font que créer une certaine instabilité dans la société. Et malheureusement, il est très difficile de contrôler cela parce que les hommes sont friands d'informations à sensation, les êtres humains sont friands de mauvaises nouvelles, parce que malheureusement, même au lieu, s'il y a de bonnes nouvelles, les gens prêtent très peu d'attention à cela. Mais quand il y a de mauvaises nouvelles, chacun essaie de courir vers ça. Aujourd'hui, malheureusement, ça rend très difficile même le travail des journalistes qui passent plus de temps to debunk fake news than to come up with real news, because the social media are controlling basically the mind of people and spreading all kinds of fake news, and unfortunately people are more sensitive to those things than anything. And it will be very difficult for governments to control them in the name of freedom of expression. Today it's a big challenge for almost all the countries, and with the trolls that we are having also. You've seen the situation in the Sahel, for example. Today you have a chronic instability in the Sahel region, and it's all backed by fake news. And whenever something happens, you see a lot of things that are not coming ex nihilo. They've been prepared. It's another strategy of controlling the world. So I think it's important that we put our heads together to see how best we can counter these forces, but they are here to stay. They are here to stay, so it's the onus is on us also to prepare a counter-attack. Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur Tanger. Je me tourne vers vous, Monsieur Serrard. Peut-être en restant sur ce thème-là, pensez-vous que les États sont impuissants face à des acteurs non étatiques comme les grandes entreprises technologiques pour essayer de les forcer à contribuer à la paix globale et à un dialogue basé sur la vérité?
Yes, as it has been said before, there are so many actors now which are basically the stakeholders in our, let's say, in our efforts to provide more peace, security, and prosperity in this world. There is civil society, there are multinational companies, there are, of course, states and regional organizations, etc. And I think that if you want to make this world a better place for all, we must be inclusive, tolerant and inclusive. Speaking about the universal truth, I also believe in it, but I understand that we are all approaching towards it from different angles, from different perspectives, which means that we must listen to each other, and that means that we must include civil society, economy, all stakeholders in this not so exclusive political discussion about the future challenges and goals. Just let me make a very short remarks about this social media and journalism. I think that this rise of this yellow journalism is very harmful for the world. All those fake news, all those misinformations, all those manipulations with the people. And what we really need, not just in this aspect, but also if we want to provide more, let's say, sustainable development in the world, we need education. Education is the basis of everything. So we must teach young people, our children in schools and at home and everywhere, how to deal with all these challenges, so how to approach the social media, not to get manipulated, how to understand that they must become tolerant, that they must be in favor of democratic goals, democratic objectives, and how they need to become part of this world. So this is the second thing. We have to empower, we have to encourage the youth, younger generations to be part of our political and economic and other kinds of development in this world. So they are very important. They are our future, as we are their future right now in a sense of the word. Now, let me also say something about multilateralism. I haven't finished my thought before. I fully agree with my colleagues here that we need more multilateralism and that we lost a part of it, which is bad for the world. But we must be realistic. We must understand that there also have to be regionalism. There has to be part of patriotisms in the world. We all need all these kinds of things, so we have to reconcile them in a way. So right now, when we lack more multilateralism, we must understand that also minilateralism could be helpful. because we see the tendency towards regionalism. This multipolarity is the fact, so we have to accept it and try to build multilateralism within those multipolar entities, and then try to connect them back in the future to become more multilateral. For example, by trying to fulfill all these sustainable development goals, we must also be open to flexilateralism, because not all countries can have the same approach here. The same demands cannot go for different countries. So there are different kinds of approaches here, but finally, we have to understand that no country alone, not even the biggest ones, the strongest ones, the most powerful ones, can deal with the most pressing challenges of this world alone, like mass migrations, climate change, world pollution, natural resources, the lack of natural resources, etc. So I do believe that, let me finish by this, that we must, in the long run, of course, invest in education, invest in communication, empower the younger generations, and to be very inclusive. But in the short run, of course, we must try to reform the UN, the Security Council, even though this will be a very difficult project. We must make some institutional changes and try to bring the superpowers in permanent communication, because this can prevent misunderstandings and conflicts which can emerge then. So communication, tolerance, and of course exchange of different views, this is so important for our common development.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Serrar. Monsieur Lajek, je vous propose peut-être de revenir ou d'aborder la question de la résolution de conflits. On évoque beaucoup depuis le début de ce panel les difficultés du cadre multilatéral actuel, la nécessité de réformer les institutions multilatérales, mais en attendant qu'on remplisse ces objectifs-là, notre monde est quand même marqué par des conflits importants qu'il convient d'essayer de résoudre. Et si ce n'est pas des cadres multilatéraux qui permettent d'arriver à une résolution, quelles peuvent être, en attendant, si je puis dire, les initiatives, les pistes, les moyens de au moins créer du dialogue pour résoudre les principaux conflits de notre époque?
Before answering this question, let me add my take to the previous topic that other panelists were expressing their views on. And in my first intervention, I spoke about the complexity of today's world and yes, less multilateralism, more multipolarism, which was still only part of the problem or part of the challenge, namely the intergovernmental architecture, the system of international organizations, the behavior of governments. But in today's world, there are other very influential players, and we cannot ignore them. There are multinational companies whose decisions make global impact. There are multinational or global social media who influence how politics is done or what people think about politics. And what I want to say is that we cannot ignore the fact that there are other relevant actors. We should not compete. We need to work together to complement each other. And of course, being a diplomat, I always want to see the governments and the democratic institutions, international organizations, to be the ones who are setting the agenda and not following the agenda which is set by somebody else. Another paradox of our world these days is that there has never been more information, and access to information has never been more easy than it is now, and yet people are more confused, more disinformed than ever before. And we all have our own truth because we all have our own sources of information that are confirming our truth, and that's not okay, obviously. And I'm not calling for censorship, but I'm warning from us being locked in our own information bubbles, which will prevent us from understanding each other. And that's why we need to have a global arrangement, global deal about the new world. That is extremely, extremely important. And as Mr. Serrar said, we have to make sure that it is a participatory process, not only the governments, but all those who are willing to have their say and to contribute. Young people, absolutely. I mean, if they feel excluded, they will not follow what's happening and they will live in a different world. Activists or civil activists, civil societies, if they are willing to contribute, they should be given the chance. And this brings me to your questions about the conflict resolution. Well, peace is more than just absence of war. And the conflict does not stop when the fighting or killing stops. When we speak about peace, we need to speak about the peace cycle, sustainable peace. That means it starts with conflict prevention. It starts with listening to the signals coming from the ground and not ignoring them. Very often, I mean, almost no conflicts happen overnight so that everyone is surprised. There are warning lights flashing for a long period of time. The question is whether we are willing and able to respond before it's too late. That's one thing. So, and for this, we need to be honest with each other. The dialogue is absolutely the basis for this, and honesty, and I'm not the first one on this panel mentioning these words, to try to prevent the conflict. There are even figures for that. World Bank, together with United Nations, calculated that investing in prevention of conflicts can save us at least $5 billion and at best $70 billion annually. So conflict prevention saves lives, but also saves money. Then, of course, when the conflict breaks out, we need to do everything possible to stop it. But again, once the fighting and the killing stops, this is not the end of the conflict. The society needs to heal. And we need to invest into healthy basics for the further post-conflict development of the society, so that the conflict will not recur, or the society will not be divided. There is no frustration that will lead to new conflicts. So we really need to invest in the cycle of peace. That's crucial. And then we will contribute to the world of peace. And as long as, of course, there is no peace, then there is no development, then there is no future. And then we are faced to deal with all these negative phenomena, which unfortunately are taking too much of our time and energy.
Thank you, Mr. Lajek. Mr. Crawford, I have a question for you. Nowadays, we hear a lot about the need for ceasefire, the need to open negotiation between parties in conflict. But what are, in your opinion, the key conditions that can enable to open this kind of negotiation or to implement ceasefire with the goal to have negotiations? What are the prerequisites to that?
Well, thank you for that, and you're absolutely right. With the conflicts that we have at hand globally, this is really a key question. First of all, we all know that we cannot have real peace or ceasefire if none of the parties are willing to engage in that. That's really the fundamental here. But how do you motivate parties to engage and support peace or ceasefire? I think it's about, if you take the current situation with Gaza, sorry to bring it up, but it's about looking what can resolve this decades-long conflict. How do we get back to a solution where we have a two-state solution? How do we ensure that the parties feel secure, all parties, and how do we ensure that the livelihood of all people, whether Israelis or Palestinians, that they are secured? I mean, that's really, we need to get back to the fundamentals. And when it comes to Russia's aggression against Ukraine, here I think, I have a very firm stand on that, because if you violate the UN Charter so brutally, even as a P5 country like Russia did in February last year, you have to see a situation where Russia abides the rules, the fundamental rules that ensure peace between states in the world. And I think that's a precondition for peace, or a situation where Ukraine can gain its sovereignty and territorial integrity and freedom back. So I think that's some of them. But if I may, I think we also need to find the motivation. We need to have some shared vision of the world. We need to talk about how we resolve problems together. I mean, we have in other panels talked about the COP coming up. Climate is destroying our societies, and it's disproportionately hurting what some call the global south more than the rest, but it's hurting all of us. Why don't we come together with a strong vision to collaborate so we ensure that the actions taken to ensure that our climate is not destroyed will be done in an inclusive way, where, for example, when countries, they promise funds to do it, that they also deliver. We fail to deliver on Paris, fundamentally. And where we ensure that the ones who are mostly affected, they also get compensated, for example, so they can actually act here. That should be a common vision. But I must say that the world of today, we shouldn't be naive. There is a lot of autocrats, there's a lot of tyrants, dictators that are willing to do what it takes to polarize all of us. And that's why, when I talked about social media before, I think social media is an emancipating power in the hands of many young people, for example, that are using it to gather and to speak their mind. And I like that. I like it a lot. But I also think that social media can be a tool for a dictator or for others, forces that want to split us apart. Therefore, we live in a situation of unpeace globally, where we are just on the threshold of war, but it's unpeace where social media, where disinformation, misinformation, where cyber attacks, where hybrid warfare, where blowing up pipelines and stuff like that is happening. We need to deal with that, in my opinion, to become more safe in the world. That was a long answer to a short question, but I think at the end of the day, the parties, Russia, they need to be ready to follow the rules. Then we are back, hopefully, on track.
Thank you, Mr. Kofod. Ambassador Fu Ying, I'd like to follow up on this topic of peace negotiation and opening venue for negotiation. In your opinion, what's the responsibility of great powers, and how great power try to motivate stakeholders who are in conflict to open negotiation? Can great power play a major role in that perspective?
Very, very good question. I think when you say great power, you include China, right?
Maybe.
Which is a very new thing for the Chinese. When I first came into diplomatic career, China was quite underdeveloped, and we were quite peripherized on international affairs. We were watching, observing, and all of a sudden we were called as great power. Anyway, it's a learning curve for China. But when we, to answer your question, how much the major countries, the powers can do over international conflict, I think there can be more effective mediation if the parties in the conflict are willing, especially if the parties in the conflict are not great powers. I haven't seen in history book that the great bigger powers, the stronger powers, were successfully being mediated. Even if there was fatigue in the world, they will find a way out by themselves. I myself was involved, as we talked about it in the break. I was involved in the peace talks over Cambodia. and it was negotiated among the Perm Fives. And it was, I think, so far, one of the most successful mediation, bringing peace to our country. But the conditions were, all the conditions were there. All the four parties, conflicting parties in Cambodia were willing, and the Perm parties were agreeing, were agreeable, and the peace accord was signed after breaking down of the Berlin Wall. So that was an interesting event which transpired the period of end of the Cold War. Afterwards, I think for example, the current conflicts, China is often asked to tell the Russians to stop fighting. I would say if China comes in as a mediator, China cannot be liked by either side. If China helps the US and Ukraine side, China will not be able to do. Able to do a mediation. If China sides with Russia, China cannot be a mediator. And before Russia, Ukraine, Europe, and US are ready and willing, there isn't much any country can do about mediation. So that's a real. I agree that we have to be realistic about the world. And on Palestine and Israel, if U.S. cannot, U.S. has the strongest influence over Israel. If U.S. cannot call off Israeli, cannot bring about a ceasefire, who can? And in this conflict, Palestine is obviously very much weaker than Israel. And China has been very supportive of Palestine all these years. And we have been calling together with the region for 2 states. And I don't know how much the international community can do. I really hope this time maybe the 2 states solution can seriously be brought on the table, and there can be some progress on it. And I really hope the great powers, you mentioned all the great powers, can be committed, and I really hope the region, all the parties are willing. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Mr. Pincus, I extend the question to you on the prerequisite, the key condition to open negotiation. What are there in your mind if great power cannot play their full role in that?
Yes. If anybody can play a role, of course, it must be a big power. There are examples in history when some smaller powers, let's say, expressed their will to be a mediator, and it was a success. But in a present situation, especially when we speak about Russia and Ukraine, it's difficult to imagine that anybody could push situation towards peace negotiations except the big powers. And even I'm not an optimist even with that, because situation is such that after kind of a failure from Russian side in all this campaign, it's really very difficult to recognize that failure, especially domestically. And it really must be found the way how to push Russia into that situation, that willingness to negotiate would arise. When we speak about just ceasefire, that would be not the end of the story. That could, give some break, but during that break, I'm sure that, just resources would be restored, and and the aggression would be continued. And if that aggression would be not stopped in Ukraine, that it could go further in different directions. So I am not a big optimist on that, but if anyone can do something, it must be a great power.
Thank you. And maybe one last question before I open the floor to questions. This last question for Mr. Ellenbogen, a simple one. Do you think that the US still has leverage on its major allies to force them to negotiate?
Yes.
And maybe what kind of leverage?
I'd rather hear from the students today.
Okay, so maybe we can open the floor for questions. We have a few minutes. So, si vous voulez donc prendre un micro qui vous sera confié par l'organisation, vous levez, vous présentez et posez vos questions de la façon la plus brève, concise et précise possible, de sorte à ce que nos panélistes puissent y répondre. Nous avons un peu de temps, donc manifestez-vous, le micro arrive, peut-être monsieur. Ouais, monsieur.
Hello, good morning. My name is Hussein Ben Said, and I'm a student at the University of Luxembourg Law. I would like to ask three brief questions. One about Russia and the United States, which is two parties are here representing both, and as well Africa and the European Union. First, we saw in 2003 the US-led invasion of military operation of Iraq, and so many make a comparison between the US-led operation with Russia operation in Ukraine. Well, both were different. One was from the UN, other was directly from unilaterally made. So I would like to know the opinion of Her Excellency, the ambassador, former ambassador of China, and as well of His Excellency Ellenbogen. And the second one as well, the opinion of Denmark and the European parts here, because I think it is very much interesting. And the other for His Excellency Tanger for his perspective, or African perspective regarding this rising powers in the world, Turkey and others, who try somehow to enforce their policies and their interests, but in place of other small countries. And by the way, I'm not accusing Turkey, but I'm just saying the rising powers. Thank you.
Thank you. Three very interesting and precise questions. Who want to answer first? Ambassador.
I think you asked me about Iraq and Ukraine. As far as I remember, neither was agreed by UN. Neither had consent from UN. Even Iraq, US took around UN, and that's one point. Second, China did not support any.
Thank you. Mr. Kofod would like to answer.
Yeah, well, thank you for the excellent questions. I think there's a big difference between what happened in 2003 with Iraq and what happens now with the Russian aggression against Ukraine. And I'm saying that I was in the Danish parliament at the time. I was actually a spokesperson for foreign affairs for my party. I was against the invasion of Iraq because I thought that the diplomatic efforts to resolve the crisis of weapons of mass destruction was not given a real chance. We don't have time to dig into all of the details here, but I thought there was a genuine also attempt by the UN system and others to find a way to, I would say, peacefully ensure that Iraq would not threat the world with weapons of mass destruction. And that was, unfortunately, that was bypassed by the decision to invade Iraq. But I thought Iraq under Saddam Hussein was a big threat to the region, to the world, and that threat has to be dealt with. It has to be dealt with. What happened with Russia's aggression against Ukraine is a blunt violation of the UN Charter. It's a sovereign country, which Russia recognizes as a sovereign country, that it invades with the most brutal warfare, violating all principles of war, doing atrocities you will not believe. And this is a Russia, which is a permanent member of the UN Security Council. So I think if we have to have peace in Ukraine, Russia needs to respect international law, fundamentally. And then I don't have time to answer your question on Africa, but I wanted to say my initial point, we need to reform the UN Security Council. And one of the things which is important is to get Africa in the UN Security Councils, like India, like Latin America, like the Caribbeans, like Japan, like Germany. I mean, we have today a dysfunctional security architecture multilaterally, so we cannot deal with crisis, I fear, in the future, and that is concerning me a lot.
Thank you. Monsieur Tanger, je pense.
Yes, I think for Africa, the more talk about African Renaissance cannot happen without Africa taking the lead, the Africans taking the lead. We should not be afraid of any partnership, but it should be a win-win situation, not the way we used to do business. Because if we want to break the vicious circle of underdevelopment, I think it's important that we take the driver's seat. And in it, one of our panelists, distinguished panelists, mentioned the importance of education. Education, education. That's the key to break the vicious circle of underdevelopment. Underdevelopment is not a fatality. If you look at the history of Africa, many of the countries, I just take the case of my own country, the Gambia. We were independent in 1965. Singapore was independent in 1965. We are admitted at the United Nations on the 22nd of September 1965, Singapore, Gambia, and the Maldives. And when we attained independence, people were dancing happy because we had all the natural resources. When Singapore attained independence, Lee Kuan Yew was crying, saying that they are not ready. But look at today, the gap that separates these countries. So it's important that we put emphasis on one of the most valuable resources that we have is the human resources. And through education and with all the potential that we have in Africa, I think we'll be able to stop those who are only interested in tearing treasures out of the bowels of the African land. And we can have a win-win cooperation and partnership. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Nous avons encore un peu de temps pour au moins une petite question, dépendant des réponses. Donc, manifestez-vous, puis peut-être Madame au troisième rang. Je sais pas si...
First of all, thank you for letting me address this question. My name is Sofia Gmi. I'm a first-year student in political science at the International University of Rabat. Mr. Lajak, as a former United Nations president, do you align with Mr. Kofod's perspective on the fact that reforming the United Nations and the Security Council is necessary and imperative to establish a legitimate system, particularly in the context of global fragmentation and the actual global crisis around the world, taking the fact that a lot of countries do not hesitate to break the United Nations rules. Do you agree with Mr. Kofod's perspective on that? Thank you.
Yes, I do. As you might have understood from my interventions, I very much believe in world based on rules, in a strong multilateral system, which is where the rules give the power and not the power generates or sets the rules. And of course, I want to see United Nations at the center of the global multilateral system, because United Nations is the most representative international organization. And I spent a year as the president of the United Nations General Assembly, and I see how much the member states are lodging for change, for more just representation, particularly on the Security Council, because that's of course, the most important body that delivers legally binding decisions. And we know, it's not a secret, that the Security Council is blocked for 10 years, so it fails to fulfill its role. And I I'm fully aware of how sensitive the issues about the redistribution of seats in the Security Council is, but the fact that there is no African permanent member of the Security Council is a shame. And this needs to be changed, of course, to begin with.
Merci beaucoup. Je pense que c'est ce qui va conclure cette session. Ça a été un véritable plaisir de l'animer. Vous nous avez donné beaucoup de matière à réflexion sur la façon de concevoir et de faire la paix dans un monde fragmenté. En mon nom personnel donc, et au nom de l'audience ici présente, je vous remercie, chers distingués panélistes, et vous souhaite à toutes et à tous une très bonne dernière journée dans le cadre de ces MEDays 2023. Bonne journée. Merci.